Hello, pleasure being with you all today. I'm Geordan Waldman with Doctor's Choice Fitness. I have a Master's of Science in Applied Gerontology, and I'll be discussing how exercise shapes Alzheimer's disease risk. Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia, making up to 80% of dementia cases, affecting over 6 million adults in the US. The risk of developing the disease is 1 in 9 over the age of 65 and increases as we age. Progression takes anywhere from 3 to 20 years upon onset of symptoms and kills 1 in 3 adults, making it the sixth leading cause of death in the United States for those over the age of 65. Alzheimer's disease is characterized by cognitive impairments that grow worse over time due to the nature of tau proteins and beta amyloid plaques harming neurons in the brain. Symptoms include difficulty planning and managing daily tasks, cognition challenges, attention issues, memory deficits, and issues with sensory processing. So my research question was, how and why does exercise reduce Alzheimer's disease risk? I started by looking at common contributing risk factors to Alzheimer's disease: genetics, diabetes, cardiovascular conditions, chronic inflammation, head injuries, sensory losses, sedentary lifestyle, depression, obesity, and poor sleep. Exercise can improve outcomes and reduce risk of 8 of the 10 of these. There are certain risk factors outside of our control: genetics, race, gender. But there are also factors that are in our control. These are modifiable risk factors, which are behaviors and exposures that can raise or lower a person's risk of Alzheimer's disease. These things include sedentary lifestyle, unhealthy diet, obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and smoking. I began by looking at exercise's effects on gray matter atrophy and memory. Alzheimer's disease brain atrophies focus on the hippocampus, temporal lobe, frontal lobe, and parietal lobe. If you're not familiar with neurology, hippocampus is the memory region of the brain. The temporal deals with hearing and memory. Frontal deals with movement, language, and executive function, so things like planning and day-to-day tasks. Parietal lobe deals with sensory processing and sense of direction. Now, aerobic exercise has been linked with reductions in hippocampal atrophy, and increases in VO2 max were associated with increases in the posterior and anterior hippocampus volume. Our VO2 max is the maximum rate of oxygen your body is able to use during exercise. So the more efficient you are, the better your hippocampal volume is. When an older adult has dementia, typically their hippocampus will shrink 1 to 2% annually. But a study doing a 1-year aerobic exercise intervention saw an increase of 2% of hippocampal volume, essentially slowing the damage and neurodegradation caused by dementia. Exercise showed improvements in gray matter volume within the entorhinal cortex, which is linked to episodic encoding and working memory maintenance. The entorhinal cortex is a widespread network hub for memory, navigation, and our perception of time, and it's the main interface between the hippocampus and the neocortex. The neocortex dealing with attention, thought, perception, and episodic memory. Regular exercise in the form of walking showed greater volumes in the frontal, occipital, entorhinal, and hippocampal regions. It's important to note that these benefits were due to starting exercise regimens earlier in life. And it's obviously better to start younger and keep going, but as noted earlier, starting now and being consistent can create significant improvements in brain health. Next, I wanted to look at exercise effects on genetic predisposition because it's such a large contributor to risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. So the genetic risk falls on the APOE4 gene on our 23rd chromosome. Having at least one APOE4 gene increases your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease 2 to 3-fold. And if you have two, your risk is even higher at approximately 8 to 12-fold. This is why women typically have a higher chance of developing Alzheimer's disease than men. But that doesn't mean Alzheimer's disease is a guarantee. One study suggested that those with this genetic marker showed higher benefits from exercise interventions on cognitive, neuropsychiatric, and physical measures than non-carriers even. In another study of self-reported exercise levels, those who reported high levels of physical activity had lower amyloid beta protein buildup, and the effects were greatest in those with genetic predispositions. Amyloids are the hallmark biomarker for Alzheimer's disease, and you can measure the progression into Alzheimer's disease by amyloid ratios in spinal fluid. But even if you have the genetics to increase risk, exercise can improve your outcomes. Next, I was looking at neural vascularity. The amyloid model is the leading theory, but the vascular model is a strong contender. The vascular model instead proposes reduction in blood flow, causes the damage to glial and neuronal cells, resulting in the buildup of amyloid, beta, and tau bundles. This model is arguing that while amyloids are a necessary condition, they are not sufficient alone to cause Alzheimer's disease. Vascular complications may be a more important biomarker in diagnosing early Alzheimer's risk, as vascular damages cause amyloid buildup that results in cognitive decline and dementia symptoms. Cardiovascular conditions like hypertension, for instance, are an important risk factor for Alzheimer's disease and affect 1 in 3 adults in the US. Hypertension causes arterial stiffness, microbleeding, macrobleeding, and microinfarcts in the brain, which lead to Alzheimer's disease. Microinfarcts are a microscopic stroke that may be the second most important cause of dementia. Greater physical activity levels raise brain-derived neurotropic factors, which can increase hippocampal volume and improve memory function. And higher aerobic fitness levels were associated with greater neuronal health in the frontal cortex for better working memory function. And exercise lowers your risk of cardiovascular diseases by 40%, substantially reducing that risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. Looking at exercise's roles in reduction of other alternate chronic conditions, I was looking at diabetes risk. So Alzheimer's disease has been shown to be a dysfunction of insulin signaling in the brain and has been coined type 3 diabetes. So type 3 diabetes occurs when the neurons in the brain become unable to respond to insulin properly. And that's essential for basic tasks like memory processing and learning. And then this metabolic syndrome causes oxidative stress, which damages neurons, causing the breakdown of cells. This runaway response causes chronic inflammation and later leads to the amyloid deposits that lead to Alzheimer's disease. But there's good news in that the neuroprotective effects of exercise can lower your risk of diabetes by 58%. So an analysis of 11 studies linking Alzheimer's risk to exercise show that regular exercise can reduce your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease by as much as 45% when started in midlife, which is a substantial reduction in risk. Alzheimer's disease is a progressive neurodegenerative disease that presents itself through a lifetime of low-level damages within the brain. By the time symptoms have arisen, the damage is extensive because our brains are so robust. Since there is no cure at the moment, prevention becomes invaluable. Exercise can reduce the leading cause of Alzheimer's disease that causes like the development of vascular disease, diabetes, and chronic inflammation. And we must rely on prevention to reduce risk and improve outcomes. As I say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of the cure. Since there's no cure, prevention is the most important thing we can do at this time.